Hello everyone and welcome to our YouTube lecture number 3 on period 7. And this one's going to deal with World War I. Yes, our first World War, our first major conflict that the United States will get involved in. Kind of get involved in. I mean, it's sort of debatable how much time and effort America did put into World War I, but it is part of it. It's more part of the peace process that's going to happen afterwards. So let's kind of get into this lecture here. Here is our focus question. Remember, I give you a focus question now for these periods. And this is the same one you'll have for every one you look at. In what ways did progressivism include both democratic and anti-democratic aspects? Now, what I would like you to do in your homework, I'd like for you to go ahead and tell me in what ways would World War I fall into progressivism, and how did it promote both democratic and anti-democratic aspects of progressivism? All right, so I'm going to look for you to see if you can figure that out as we go through this. You'll probably, as I go along, you'll hear me say some things that you go, oh, well, that's that. Oh, well, okay, that would be that too. So, by the way, for me, I don't know when you're listening to this, but I just got home because it was Taco Tuesday. And there's nothing like a good taco. If you're watching this and you haven't eaten yet, by all means, stop and go get something to eat, right? Or have something to drink, whatever it is. Enjoy it. Let's move on now. So here we are in Key Concept 7.3. You might remember this concept because this is the one we use for imperialism, right? Because we're now in Roman numeral 2. The Spanish-American War and imperialism was Roman numeral 1. But again, here is our participation in a series of global conflicts. So first was the Spanish-American War. Now we're in World War I. And then we're going to get into World War II. All right, that will also be part of this 7.3 key concept. So it's debating. Look, right there, it's in our concepts. Renewing its domestic debates over the nation's proper role in America, especially during what they feel is peacetime. Debates about what we should or shouldn't do, because as we talked about last time, our foreign policy has basically been isolationism for a long time because of George Washington's farewell address. And for the most part, America has kept to that until this world conflict began. Letter A tells you that America initially was neutral. They're going to hold to Washington's idea of neutrality. But this was a major, major conflict in the world. I'm sure you learned this in world history. On the 28th of June, 1914, the Archduke, the heir apparent to the Austrian-Hungarian Empire, is assassinated by a teenager, by the way. Just so you know, he was a teenager, a member of the Black Hand organization, and that starts off a series of events. All these various European countries were in alliances with each other, and once one country went to war, it toppled every one of them into war. There's a famous book written decades later after this conflict called The Guns of August that basically talked about how the European armies had basically based everything that they knew about war on the 19th century and did not realize that the 20th century things had progressed way too fast and the killing is going to be on a massive scale now. But eventually this is going to lead the United States into this conflict. Now, Woodrow Wilson won the election of 1912. All right, so he won the election of 1912, takes his oath of office 1913. The world seemed like it was this perfect utopia. Progressivism is exploding in America. Liberal reform is in other places around the world. And Woodrow Wilson wanted to be a domestic president. He did not like Theodore Roosevelt's big stick policy, and he couldn't stand William Howard Taft's dollar diplomacy. So he really wanted to focus on domestic issues. And that's really what he's going to be about that first year in office from 1913 to throughout 1914. We're going to get several progressive acts, Clayton Antitrust Act gets passed, lower tariffs. You're going to get the Federal Reserve Bank is going to be created. But then the world gets engulfed in this war. In the beginning, again, during his first term, he is going to stay out. The United States will stay neutral. The United States would like to trade. And at this time, we don't see anyone as an enemy. Germany's not an enemy. England's not an enemy. France, Russia, everyone's just involved in a conflict that really shouldn't have ever happened in the first place. But slowly and gradually, the United States gets closer and closer. Woodrow Wilson will run for re-election in 1916. He ran on a campaign promise, he kept you out of war. And I always thought that was a pretty interesting slogan. He kept you out of war. We're going to talk a little bit about that in class. Kept is past tense. He didn't promise America that he was going to keep you out of war or that he's keeping you out of war. He said, I kept you out of war. And he wins his re-election in 1916. And then it gets even harder for America. The Germans are practicing unrestricted submarine warfare. They're sinking all ships in the Atlantic Ocean, now including American merchant ships, ships of commerce and trade. We find out about the Zimmermann Note, a German telegraph that was sent to the German ambassador of Mexico, telling the Mexican government that if they attacked the United States, Germany would come and help them reclaim Texas through California. This was a telegram that was intercepted by the British and given to the American government. To this day, I think there's some controversy if that truly happened or not, but in every history book it's there, so until they find any proof that it never actually happened, it's always going to be there. All of this, and then you might remember in world history the sinking of the Lusitania. That was a British passenger ship or a cruise ship. Several Americans were on that boat as well. All this is starting to really antagonize the American government. There's going to be a speech in January of 1917, and I don't have that up here, but it's called Peace Without Victory, where Woodrow Wilson is going to say that we need to have a peace in Europe, but one without victory. And in that speech, he talks about in order to have a victor, there always must be a loser. And if you have a loser in such a great war as this one was, you'll have horrible terms put on that loser, and that loser eventually get angry over a decade or two, and he will rise up again and fight another war. Woodrow Wilson, kind of smart guy. But no one in the world took him seriously. Then the Kaiser, the leader of Germany, Kaiser Wilhelm, not the Wilhelm in my class, although, you know, that's why I kind of call him Wilhelm a lot. But anyways, he decided unrestricted submarine warfare is how he was going to respond to Wilson. And more American ships are going to get sunk. This basically forced Woodrow Wilson to approach Congress on April 6, 1917, and ask for a declaration of war. And his famous statement is to make the world safe for democracy. This is unique in American history. To go to war, as he said, we're not going to war for territorial gain. We're not going for monetary gain, which is normally what war is. But he changed the complexity of war for America in the essence that it's for preserving democracy. But now you have to ask yourself, what kind of democracy is he talking about? Remember, he's a progressive liberal Democrat. He's thinking of a progressive democracy. He's believing that the world needs to change from monarchies to democratic governments, and progressive governments at that. Now, America might have declared war in April of 1917, but it's going to take a while before America actually can build a military force. We ain't got one, to be honest with you, in the time period. We have to build some battleships to go protect. We can't. If you start just bringing men over in the Atlantic Ocean, they're going to sink them with their submarines. So we got to put battleships out there to protect convoys. You got to build all that stuff. You got to raise an army. In the United States, I don't think had. It depends on what book you read. 13 to 18,000 total troops, including officers of all the branches of the military, right? While everybody else is fighting with a 1,000,000-man army, we don't even have 20,000. So you got to build an army. Volunteers are called upon. A draft is instituted. But in the meantime, Woodrow Wilson decides again to put his progressive spin on this war. And in January of 1918, so nearly a full year later, we still haven't sent troops. We're sending aid, but he gives his 14 points. He gives a speech known as the 14 points, a speech before Congress, outlining what this war should be about. Now, I don't have all 14 listed here. It's unimportant, but the first 5, very specific, are very broad in what he wants to do. He wants to abolish secret treaties. He saw those alliances that they had as one of the causes of war. We got to get rid of that. You can't have secret treaties anymore. Newsflash, he goes into a secret treaty with France after the war. I mean, just saying, you know. Freedom of the seas. Everyone should be able to trade. One of the things that Germany was mad about was that the British controlled so much of the oceans and restricted trade. Well, you can't do that anymore. Remove economic barriers. Those are those tariffs that we've been talking about. Tariffs, you say, raising tariffs. Not for the Confederacy, with that issue, but still, it's a problem for the world. You start raising a tariff, another nation raises a tariff. Next thing you know, nobody's trading anymore. There's no commerce in the world, and that hurts economies. So let's remove those. Let's lower these tariffs. Reduction of arms. No, not like your actual literal arm, but your weapons, which really made a lot of people in Europe happy when they read that one. Because in order to have a lot of military weapons, you got to have a lot of taxes in your country. This would reduce taxes and thereby lift a massive strain off of the people of the various countries of Europe. He also wanted to adjust colonial claims. Right, all these colonies in Africa, in India, in Asia, and China, Vietnam. So he was kind of going to be seen as a savior of the world. In fact, a lot of people saw him as a Messiah type figure when he finally gets into the war. Now, it's the 14th point where he calls upon a League of Nations. Right, Batman, Superman, Wonder Woman, Aquaman. Oh wait, no, I do that every time. That's the Justice League. I'm sorry, guys. I'm sorry. Not one of my favorite movies, but it's definitely one of my favorite teams. But anyways, moving along. The League of Nations, putting together all these countries together. Instead of going to war, let's talk it out, people. Let's just talk out our problems and never ever fight again. It's a very idealistic way of looking at the world. He's going to find out that when the war is over and he goes over there to broker the peace and he brings his 14 points, these European governments aren't going to want to listen to this American president. And really the only one that's really truly adopted is that 14th point. But there's going to be a problem with it for the United States. And we're going to get into that in here in just a couple of slides. But I want to now put your attention over to 7.2. Why are we going back to the key concepts? Because they put this thing in 7.2 instead of where it should have gone in 7.3. I'm just saying, College Board, if you're listening, this would have been a lot better if this was in 7.3. Anyways, letter C, 7.2, Roman numeral 1, letter C. Official restrictions on freedom of speech. Espionage, Sedition acts. Espionage is like spying, but also committing acts of sabotage and mayhem in a country. And of course, sedition. You might remember sedition acts with John Adams during the XYZ affair. They've come back during this war. We're going to limit people's free speech. And that's going to lead to a very famous Supreme Court case, Charles Schenck. There's multiple ways that people tell me to pronounce that over the decades that I've taught. So I just go with Schenck versus the United States. These were socialists who were creating pamphlets. Do you remember something called the 13th Amendment? You see that right down here in this. Oops, where's my, my pointer has disappeared. But if you look down in the bottom left, You see where it says, long live the Constitution of the United States. Wake up, America. Your liberties are in danger. And down there they say the 13th Amendment. Because now they quote it. Neither slavery nor involuntary servitude, except as punishment of a crime. So what is it to be drafted? These group of socialists begin to argue that involuntary servitude is a draft. That's a violation of the 13th Amendment. Well, several of these guys are going to go to jail. And we're going to get into this whole you can't yell fire in a crowded theater and what a clear and present danger means. I want you to do me a favor, though, in your notes. I want you to find out who was the judge that said you can't yell fire in a crowded theater. I want to see that in your notes. All right, I won't tell you that, but we are going to do this in class. We're going to do this particular court case in class a little bit more in depth. But this is your limit of free speech during wartime. All right, let's get back to 7.3. I missed you, 7.3. Glad to have you back. So again, he had his 14 points. You notice I really didn't talk about the war, just so you understand. America only participate in it for a few months, maybe 3 or 4 battles, and then it was over. I mean, America handled itself well. Don't get me wrong. America handled itself well. One of the things that Woodrow Wilson gave John J. Pershing, the commander of the American Armed Forces, was that America fought as America, because the European powers, like France, for instance, wanted America to fight under the French flag. And that was not going to happen. And Wilson wanted to make sure that wasn't going to happen. And John J. Pershing was not going to let that happen. So America did fight as an independent army. So here in letter C, it tells you that even though he has this deep involvement in all those negotiations, right? He goes to Europe. He's the first sitting president to go physically to Europe while he's president of the United States. Both a good thing, but it also angered the Republican Party. When he went over there, he only brought Democrats with him. He refused to bring any Republicans. He is not playing nice with the other party. He's going to get the Treaty of Versailles, which officially ends the war. And if you sign the Treaty of Versailles, the ultimate goal is that you now are a member of the League of Nations. But the United States Senate has gone Republican. The United States Senate in this time period has become a Republican Senate. Henry Cabot Lodge is the leader of the Republican Party in the Senate and a good friend of Theodore Roosevelt's. They are not going to ratify the Treaty of Versailles. They do not want to join the League of Nations, and the reason for this is Article 10. Not Article X, but that's Article 10. Article 10 in the Treaty of Versailles, or the thing that creates the League of Nations, tells us that if a League country is attacked by a non-League member, all League nations go to war to protect it. Well, if you think about the United States Constitution, and sometimes we really got to think about that document, it clearly says in the document, only in the Constitution, I'm talking about the Constitution of the United States again, only Congress can declare war. The President of the United States does not have the right to declare war. Yes, he can go before Congress and ask for a declaration of war, but he can't do it himself. If you sign the Treaty of Versailles and you join the League of Nations, Congress gives up its war-making powers. Now, in all fairness, the Republican Party offered a compromise. Let us sign a treaty where we don't have to accept Article 10. We'll join the League, we'll sign the treaty, but we don't have to accept Article 10. And Wilson is not a compromiser. That is one of his big faults. He doesn't like compromise. He's a college professor. He's smarter than everybody in the room, and he's not going to listen to it. And this political cartoon shows it. You know, you've got, the American people, and he's got the League of Nations tucked under his arm, and it says, going to talk to the boss. Because whenever he got angry with Congress, he would always go out and talk to the people to see if they can, in the next election, let's vote some of these people out and get people in to do the things I want. So you have the Senate and the House is sitting there, and they're like, oh no, he's going to go talk to the people. But you got to understand something. Wilson is a very sick man. Something that he kept secret for a long time was he's a guy that actually had been suffering from strokes very early on in his life, but he always kept that a secret. Going to Europe, fighting with the Prime Minister of Great Britain, the Prime Minister of France and Italy, known as the Big Three. He literally had to get into these massive arguments with them, something he doesn't like to do. He's exhausted. He's tired. This is hard work. Coming back to America, now fighting Congress. His doctors told him, don't go on a nationwide tour. Rest first. He can't. He's got to go. So he goes out on this tour, and the stress and everything that he's suffering is too much for him. Now, on September 25th, 1919, in Pueblo, Colorado, giving a speech, he begins to slur his words. He begins to stumble, and before he can fall down, aides rush and get him. It's later found out that he suffered a stroke. However, not in his time period. We'll talk about this in class 2. We're now going to have this wonderful, wonderful moment in American history where his wife, Edith Wilson, will basically, for the next 18 months, be the President of the United States. She keeps everything a secret, doesn't let anybody know that he actually suffered a real stroke, and there's a couple of little staging moments that they have to trick people, trying to prove that he actually can move about and do things. And again, I'll get into a little bit of that in class. But yeah, Edith Wilson basically becomes a de facto type president during this time period. But he will suffer for this politically. The Senate will never ratify the Treaty of Versailles, and then it basically dies in Congress. And the United States never signs it, never joins the League, thereby making that entity a very, very weak entity. The United States wants to go back now into isolationism. They've had too many years of progressivism. Theodore Roosevelt, William Howard Taft, and especially Woodrow Wilson. The 1920 election went to a Republican, Warren G. Harding, on a ticket where they said a return to normalcy, a made-up word, which in the 1920 video log we'll talk a little bit more about. But now they want a unilateral foreign policy. They don't want to work with other people anymore. They want to do things on their own, right? They want to have their own international investment, peace treaties, selected military interventions to promote their vision of international order. There it is right there in the concept. I'm reading it right there. While maintaining U.S. isolationism. So you got this Washington Naval Conference happens in 1921 and 1922, also known as the Five Power Acts. It is the first ever disarmament treaty basically in history of the world. Now what I want you to do is look up what exactly were they agreeing to stop building or building less of. I'm going to take a sip of iced tea right now because it was Taco Tuesday and I need a little iced tea. I hoped you stopped to get a little something too. It's funny, the people that aren't my students all leave little nasty little notes complaining about my tea, but oh well. I like to spill the tea. The Dawes Plan, 1924, another very conservative idea. Germany has runaway inflation at the time period. I mean, really horrible inflation. And this Charles Dawes comes up with a plan. Basically, you're going to loan Germany billions of dollars. Germany owes France and Great Britain money from the war retribution. So they're going to give a portion of it to France and some of it to Britain. But they're also going to be able to, collect interest on the money, raise taxes, stimulate their economy. France also has to agree to leave the rural valley, which they had occupied after the war. This allowed for Germany to start building up a steel industry, all right, and eventually replaced France as the #1 producer of steel in Europe, which, by the way, is going to help another little group of people in Germany that come along here in a decade. The National Socialistic Workers' Party. I wonder who they are. And by the way, Charles Dawes wins a Nobel Peace Prize. Actually, he shares the Nobel Peace Prize for it, for doing this for the Germans. And America thanked him by making him the Vice President of the United States. So, hey, good going, Charles. Good going. The Kellogg-Briand Pact, which was cereal that was going to be issued all over the world. No, I'm just kidding. Not like really. Frosted Flakes saved the world. No. Kellogg was just the name of one of our senators or congressmen, and Briand is a French diplomat. 62 nations will meet and sign a non-aggression pact that they will never, ever again, ever fight war. 62 nations sign it. And I think within, 24 hours, 30 of them were at war. No, I'm joking a little bit. But it's terrible. By the outbreak of World War II, I think the United States was the last nation that was still holding on to the Kellogg-Briand Pact. There's no way to enforce this. They just thought, hey, if you sign it, you got to sign. You got to keep to your agreement. But it didn't work out that way. And that brings us to E. And it brings us to these guys. Yeah. So the 30s, because America is so concerned about its isolationism, this rise of fascism is happening and totalitarianism. I mean, you also have the Soviet Union's on the rise, and Joseph Stalin is over there, so you have that going on. But they don't want to do anything to stop it. Spain was an ally of the United States, and a fascist revolution takes place. Hitler sends troops into Spain, and Benito Mussolini sends troops into Spain to help the fascists overthrow a government. The United States responds by a series of neutrality acts. 1935, 36, 37, and then last one in 1939. By this time, FDR is President of the United States. Congress does not want the United States to get involved at all in any conflict. So they create these neutrality acts that limit what the president can or cannot do. So while the United States is sitting back doing nothing, Europe goes into yet a worse war than World War I. Right? And men like FDR completely see the United States has got to get involved. But it's not until Japan attacks Pearl Harbor in 1941, December 7th, 1941, a date that's forever live in infamy, the United States finally gets rid of isolationism forever-ish. And yeah. And so there it is. There's your key concepts for World War I. Take some really good notes on this. And yeah, we'll talk to you guys later. Have a good evening.